Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'm going to go through my usual rundown of Prime Minister's questions from yesterday between Boris Johnson and in particular the 6 questions that Keir Starmer as leader of the opposition gets and the 2 questions from Ian Blackford of the SNP. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So this one may take a while. I never know how far in advance these ones are going to last. They always last a bit longer than normal videos. This one could go on because there was a lot in it. I think each question was quite key. Keir Starmer, of course, was pushing the fact that the government have completely abandoned any notion of following the scientific advice. Ian Blackford pushed the huge levels of unemployment that the government are about to inflict upon people in the UK in general, but from the SNP's point of view, largely the people of Scotland. Now, first question from Starmer. He quoted the Prime Minister. Basically, these questions you'll see as we go through them, it's effectively like triggering lots of traps from the past few months. He's drawn various statements from Boris Johnson over the past few months and is now bringing them back to haunt him. So he quoted the Prime Minister on the 11th of May saying that the COVID strategy would be governed entirely by the science. Then he noted that on the 21st of September, the government's own scientific advisors in SAGE gave very clear advice, including the need for a circuit breaker, a short lockdown to reset things. The scientific advisors said that this would be necessary in order to avoid an exponential rise in cases. So Starmer's first question, it says, why did the Prime Minister reject that advice and abandon the science? So Johnson's first response, not really an answer, because he didn't answer any of these questions, of course not. Full of danger, these questions. He started off by saying we will do whatever it takes to fight the virus and to defeat it. Everything short of following the scientific advice, presumably. And then he said, as he quotes the SAGE advice, I might remind him that on page 1 it says, all of the measures have associated costs in terms of health and well-being, and policymakers will need to consider economic impacts and associated harms alongside this epidemiological assessment. Sure, no problem, of course. The thing is, though, that there are costs with lockdown. Any restrictions at all have costs with them. And economic costs most especially, but also other costs in terms of well-being. Absolutely, we understand that. But here's the thing. We also understand, particularly as all countries have gone through a wave now, and we've seen how some countries have done better with the second, that the costs become greater if your lockdown is deeper and or longer. And we also know that delaying lockdowns, as we did in the first wave, and we are doing again for the second, doesn't stop those costs. It just means that when you are forced to implement the lockdown, and we are going to be forced to implement the lockdown, it's going to be deeper and for longer. Then he went into rant mode, saying that the approach announced on Monday, he said, if we use this, then we can bring down the R value. And he said, will he stick to his position of Monday and support that approach? I have to say, he ain't half going to look a tit when the results show that his approach this week have had barely any impact. But anyway, Starmer for his second one said, look, I don't think that approach goes far enough, and neither does SAGE. I'd already talked earlier in this week about the political shift in the angle that Starmer's coming from now. I won't go through that one again. Johnson's backbenchers, however, were in full heckling mode for him. This is what he wants them to do. Normally they're shut up. When Starmer's taking Johnson apart, normally the Tory backbenchers are fairly quiet because they can't really... In this particular case, though, Johnson had them on his side because, yes, he's making a right arse of the pandemic and its handling. They do not want a lockdown. They don't even like the restrictions he's put in place. And the restrictions he's put in place are piss poor. No impact at all they're having. And yet, or minimal. So he can rely on his backbenchers to back him up on this. They do not want the lockdown. He's going to suffer serious political damage when he has to order it. And then Starmer, once they'd shut up, he said, the Prime Minister talks of the costs, But since the Prime Minister rejected that sage advice on the 21st of September, I remind him that the R rate has gone up, the infection rate has quadrupled, hospital admissions have gone from 275 a day to 628 a day in England, and yesterday, which is now the day before, 441 COVID patients were on ventilators, and the number of deaths recorded was tragically the highest since June the 10th. He said that is the cost of rejecting the advice. And I think I might have hit him where it hurts most, in my opinion. Because here's the thing. Obviously, Keir Starmer's talking about the human cost. Very important. The human cost matters to Labour, and it matters more importantly to the public. But it doesn't matter to the Conservatives. They're only interested in the economic cost. But Johnson's approach also has a huge economic cost. I might have pointed out that not only has our recession bitten deeper than any other nation in the G7 after the first wave, but when you look at the economic situation now, other countries that also suffered serious recessions have started to bounce back. We haven't really at all. You know, the depth of our recession has not improved very much since summer, whereas it has in other countries. I might have talked about the fact you don't seem to be managing the economy too well in all this either. So you're not managing the health side of it, and you're not managing the economic side of it. What are you managing apart from empowering Tory donors to raid the nation's coffers? But anyway, Starmer didn't say that. What he did say was, Sage has a clear view on why that's happening. What's the PM's view on why these numbers are heading in the wrong direction? To which then Johnson said, look, and he said this before, he said, the difference between now and March is the disease is appearing much more strongly in some parts of the country to others. Yeah, like I said, he has said this before, and it was just as dumb when he said it this time as you know, before. He's suggesting that the disease was evenly distributed around the country back in spring. No, it wasn't. In fact, the main reason why it's so bad in the north of England now is because it caught on late there. The rate was rising in the north of England as we came out of lockdown, so therefore it flourished. And of course, the local measures that they've been putting in place since have been of neither use nor ornament. So of course it's carried on rising. So yeah, it is stronger in some parts of the country to others. It always was. It always was. That's the nature of it. It's not even a particular feature of this pandemic or a particular feature of this pandemic in the UK. That's how it is everywhere. Then he quoted some figures comparing northern cities with southern counties for some reason. And he said, this is why the tiered approach is the right way forward. It was interesting that. He quoted northern cities with southern counties, usually sparsely populated counties. Wonder why I didn't compare it with southern cities. That was interesting, I thought. Anyway, problem is that it's completely irrelevant. The idea of regional variations in restrictions to match regional variations in infection rates, absolutely sound. Should have been doing it a long time ago. Should have done it from the start. But not only are we not doing that properly right now, the situation is so bad that the rate is high everywhere. The government's own advisors are saying that it's bad everywhere. Civil servants, this three-tier system that Johnson introduced, civil servants have said not to call it a traffic light system because that's what the media were trying to call it, a traffic... Oh, three things. Traffic light, green, amber, red. They say, no, don't call it that because nowhere in the country is green. You know, so, but there we go. Yes, the rate is much higher in Liverpool than Cornwall, but it's bad in Cornwall too, is what the scientists are saying, and even the civil servants. The measures are not tough enough anywhere to make a significant difference. And, you know, Johnson then said, look, we want to put in the most stringent measures necessary in the places where the virus is surging. The problem is that the virus is surging everywhere. And the strongest measures he has for anywhere, the worst hit place in the country, Liverpool apparently, the worst hit, although I thought it was Nottingham. Nottingham doesn't seem to have any measures in place for some reason. But anyway, Liverpool certainly up against it in terms of hospital spaces, give it that. And the most stringent measures that Johnson announced there was we'll close the pubs then. And the rest, no. Well, we'll close gyms. I'm not a fan of gyms. We'll close down gyms and leisure centres. Right then, thanks. Oh, and casinos as well. We'll close casinos. Great, thanks. Anything else? No. Betting shops? Yeah, we'll close betting shops down. What about restaurants? No, we're keeping them open. All right. So what if people want a beer? Well, they just go to a restaurant. Or they can go to a pub, because when they say they're closing pubs down, what they mean is they're closing pubs down who don't serve meals. So if your pub serves meals, it's still fine. You just can't go in and order a pint. You can go in and order a meal and 10 pints of beer. That's fine. Then he rambled on about, getting it done where it's surging. As I say, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's surging everywhere. Our testing system absolutely is not what it should be, granted. But it's a lot better than it was for the first wave. We've caught up a bit, which means that we do actually have enough data to be able to say where the rate of infection is rising and where in the country it is falling. And I've not seen any reports or any figures that show that it's falling in any region in England. Then came an interesting comment. He said, so will he, referring to Starmer, will he get his Labour friends in the north to help us sort it out? Now here's the thing. He's referring to local council leaders and local mayors. So when Starmer called for the government to follow their own scientific advice yesterday, or the day before now, he was accused of playing party politics. But when both Labour and Conservative leaders in the north have spoken about their anger about the government's incompetence, and they're also calling for the scientific advice to be followed, Conservative and Labour leaders in the north. But Johnson singles out his criticism for Labour leaders in the north. That's not trying to play party politics. But I'll come back to that theme later. Anyway, Starmer then, for his third one, said, look, I think the Prime Minister is behind the curve again. He probably hasn't noticed that this morning the council leaders in Greater Manchester, including the Mayor and including the Conservative leader of Bolton Council, have said in a press statement that they support a circuit break above Tier 3 restrictions. Keep up, Prime Minister. And the thing is, by including the Conservative leader in that statement, what he's doing is, first of all, he's batting away the impotent statement that Johnson has just made. And he's also exposing the fact that Johnson is trying to play party politics here. Because in actual fact, it's not just Labour council leaders saying one thing and Conservative council leaders saying another. Labour and Conservative council leaders are absolutely in agreement on this. Now at this point, I could see Johnson flicking through his notes. I was trying to think, is he trying to find where Dominic Cummings has super forecast that response and telling him what to say next? The problem the Prime Minister has, Starmer continued, is it's the Sage minutes, and they make it absolutely clear his two main policies, track and trace and local restrictions, simply haven't worked. Remember, this is according to the government's own scientific advisors. Not that we need top scientific advisors to tell us this, because it's been pointed out before now, it's fairly obvious. And Starmer then said, look, we can't stand by. In June, the Prime Minister told me, again referring to a statement he'll have made in the House, that track and trace would play a vital part in ensuring that we do not get a second spike this winter. His words. 3 months later, Sage say, their words, that track and trace is only having a marginal impact on transmission. They go on to say that it is likely to further decline in the future. So what they're saying is right now it has a marginal impact. In the future, that marginal impact is going to get worse. It's going to be useless. So then Starmer said, let's not have the usual nonsense that somehow asking the Prime Minister a question about track and trace is knocking the NHS. This is Sage's assessment, the government's own advisors. So after £12 billion, let's have a straight answer. Why does the Prime Minister think that his track and trace system has gone so wrong? To which Johnson then, he started off with the words, it's thanks to NHS test and trace. I thought, what the hell sort of distraction is this supposed to be? Starmer wasn't talking about test and trace. He was talking about track and trace, purely the tracing element of it, not the testing part of it. Now, I've said before I don't like the term, but it's a government term. It's a term that the government use. So Johnson really should know the difference between the two terms. And secondly, again, bringing the NHS into it when Starmer's already headed that one off and made it clear that he wanted to know the Prime Minister's opinion, not some rant about the NHS. So then Johnson went on to talk about saying, look, we're testing more people than any other country in Europe. Again, the question wasn't about testing. It's about tracing. It wasn't even a little bit about testing. Not even as a tangent. Also, it still remains to be seen. Well, first of all, if we are testing more, maybe that's because we need to test more because, you know, we have one of the worst second waves in Europe. One of the very worst. So, of course, we should be amongst the top testers. But it still remains to be seen, are we testing more people? Because he said we're testing more people per day than anywhere else in Europe. Are we? Why don't the government release the figures of how many people we're testing a day? Because they don't do that. They release figures like how many tests have been processed and results and things like that. And you can sometimes work it out. And I'll tell you what, it's not as many as they're trying to say in television interviews. But they don't actually publish the figures of how many people are tested a day. And they haven't done for many months now. And then he said, look, we know where the disease is surging. Yeah, everywhere. We know that it is regionally distributed rather than nationally. Yeah, it always was. Always was. Never mind. And he says, and that gives us the chance to do the right thing. And he said, he wants to close pubs. He wants to close bars. He wants to close businesses in areas across the country where the incidence is low. Which, again, I'm thinking, where in the country is the incidence low? Exactly. Because... But of course, a statement like that was just very much, it was a prepared statement to get his backbenchers on side. He hasn't been able to get his backbenchers on side throughout this crisis because his crisis handling has been abysmal. But for this, he will, because it's basically almost as if, well, almost it is, as if Conservative MPs would rather we suffer a horrendous human cost from this and prolong the pandemic than to close businesses at any point. Even though the businesses will close themselves if they do not have staff to work there because they're stuck at home, isolating or ill in hospital. It just doesn't enter their heads. But, you know, the response was very much to get what he wanted, which is his backbenchers cheering, which they duly did because they genuinely do not want a lockdown. And he said... Then he tried to say, oh, Starmer supported this on Monday and last night wouldn't support our measures. And it's like, well, that's because you didn't give Starmer a vote on the measures he's actually supporting. Although I do wish Labour had voted against the 10 p.m. curfew. I understand the politics of the situation. There we go. But I still think they could have done that. I understand where they're going, though. Anyway, so then, Johnson said, look, he said one thing about a national lockdown at 5 o'clock, but when it came to a vote in the House of Commons to impose more stringent measures, he failed to even turn up. This is because the vote wasn't for more stringent measures. The vote was not for implementing Sage's recommendations. Anyway, Starmer's fourth one, he said, look, I know for someone who's been an opportunist all his life, which got a huge cheer from his side, this is difficult to understand. But having read and considered the Sage advice, I have genuinely concluded that a circuit break is in the national interest. It's the failure of the Prime Minister's strategy that means tougher measures are now unavoidable, because that is a key thing to note, obviously. Not every country in its second wave is having to even contemplate a lockdown. We are, because it's so bad. And it's so bad because the government did not follow their scientific advice 6 months ago, when they should have got a test and trace, as he likes to talk about, fully up and running and effective. I mean, Starmer has him here. He's completely got him here. You know, I would say that this is storing up more pain for Johnson later, but public opinion's already there. Public opinion is already, we know from polling, of the view that we should be following the scientific advice. And even the public were polled specifically on, would you support this circuit break? Because Sage have advised it, and the majority of people say yes. Although, interestingly, not a majority of Conservative supporters. But Johnson is going to have to order another lockdown. You know, he's got to. And that's not my view, and it's not Starmer's view. That is the view of the top experts in the country. Not that he must, or that he should. He should have done it weeks ago. Nearly a month ago now. That he will have to. He'll be forced to. There'll be nothing to stop it. Once the hospitals melts down, he has no choice. And when Johnson has to do it, he will, of course, blame it on Starmer undermining his efforts. Of course he will. That's what he always does. but the ranting will fall on deaf ears because public opinion doesn't need to be moved any further. It's already there. Starmer emphasised the unavoidability of it now, being Sage's view. He noted that himself. He said that Sage said that following their advice would get the R value below 1 and should reset the incidence level to be much lower and set the epidemic back about 4 weeks or more. He said all three are vital and that's why Labour backs it. So can the Prime Minister tell us what his alternative plan to get R below 1 is? Obviously, the question was not intended to catch Johnson out today. He'll just repeat his thing about the three-tier thing. It's to bring back against him in a few weeks' time when Johnson inevitably has to backtrack. So Johnson then stood up. Sure enough, he started. The plan is the plan that the right honourable gentleman supported on Monday. Cheers for that, Johnson. It's not quite a plan to get the R value below 1, though, is it? It's measures that are slightly better than nothing, which is why Starmer was happy to support them. Then Johnson said he was doing this to avoid the misery of another national lockdown. But again, if he'd have wanted to do that, he'd have followed the scientific advice half a year ago. Then he banged on, trying to claim that Labour were changing their mind, his usual line these days. And then he said, this is hilarious, he then said, he added in, trying to, look, like, let's work together on this, let's work together. But then he added in the suggestion that Labour were wanting kids to be taken out of school. And I'm thinking, well, no. I mean, this thing about, Labour wants bars closed and pubs closed and stuff like that they're calling for it. It's not the same as wanting it. It's like if someone needs surgery, no one wants surgery. Okay, some lunatics may. Generally speaking, people don't want surgery, but they'll support surgery to deal with something terrible. And that's the same thing here, which Johnson well knows. Never mind that. But it was a bit... But that's fine, because in theory, yeah, Labour are supporting pubs closing, restaurants closing, bars closing. Yeah, because the scientists are advising it. But they're not supporting kids being taken out of school. This one's just been plucked out of thin air. Labour are calling for the SAGE guidance to be followed. The SAGE guidance does not call for schools to be closed at all. And Labour have repeatedly stated they want kids in school. So that was just a direct lie. But roughly translated, the way he was going, that let's work together, it was basically, if I translate it, in shorter terms, it would be, let's work together, you uncooperative bastards. That's basically what he said, but in more parliamentary language. Then Starmer stood up and he said, look, following the advice is now apparently opportunistic. Presumably, he'll say the same thing to the Conservative leader of Bolton Council, who said this morning he supports a circuit break. And I've just listened to what the Prime Minister said and what he said about his strategy to get the R value below 1. The problem is that I can't think of a single scientist who backs him. He will know that the Chief Medical Officer said on Monday that he's not confident, nor is anyone confident, that the Tier 3 proposals will be enough. So then he asked, so why is the Prime Minister so confident that his approach will get the R value below 1? Or is that no longer the government plan? Again, you can see where he's seeding here to come back later to suggest that the government don't care about the R value. They don't care about the rate of infection. They only care about managing the situation politically. To which Johnson then said, look, he's misrepresenting the position. Our advice is that if the regional measures were implemented in full with the support and active cooperation of local authorities, then those measures would deliver the reductions, blah, 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 blah. Here it is. Here is the line that I was waiting for since Monday. I talked about his speech on Monday as this to me sounds like he just wants to blame local authorities. He's bringing local authorities into it so he can blame them later. And that's what he's saying there. If the measures are fully implemented with the full cooperation of local authority leaders. So in a week or two, and I will come to this with a sixth question, in a week or two's time, when Boris Johnson says, look, we've got to go into lockdown, and says, I didn't want this if we'd have only followed the measures. It's those Labour councils, they wouldn't follow the measures, and so now we're in this situation, we've got to do this now. We didn't have to do it, even though his scientific advisor said, yeah, we bloody well do. He'll say, we didn't have to do it, this is Labour's fault. That's what he's trying to do. That's what he's trying to do. He wasn't answering the question, rather. He was just ducking responsibility for later. He wasn't asked if the measures would work. We know they won't work. He was asked why he thinks they will work. But his response, as I say, it just confirmed he's just using it. It's a dirty political trick. Doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter. We shouldn't have dirty political tricks. But it's what it is. He'll won't work. He'll try it anyway, but it will not work. And the reason I say it won't work is 2 reasons. First of all, public opinion is already on the side of follow the scientific advice, will you? And the other thing is Bolton. Bolton is his Achilles heel on this. Starmer's already bringing up Bolton. And he'll bring it up again. It's a conservative area that Johnson will have to attack to adopt his strategy of blame. Yeah, he won't mention Bolton himself, but Starmer will come back at him and say you're also attacking the Conservative local authority then, are you? So there it is. Then the 6th question, as I always say for the 6th question, don't matter what Keir Starmer asks, Boris Johnson will just get up and do his rant. He'll go, phew, that's that then. Because whatever Johnson says, Starmer can't come back at him because he's not allowed to come back at him. So he started off, Starmer saying, look, I've supported the government and all their measures so far, and I've taken criticism for it, which he has. But this measure is wrong and a circuit breaker is in the national interest. I've read the advice of SAGE and the government has rejected it. Then he said, I love this bit. He said, Mr. Speaker, this is my last question and I'm sure the Prime Minister has his pre-prepared rant ready as usual. We're at a tipping point, he said. Time is running out. Maybe he can seize the moment and answer a question. This morning, the Telegraph quotes senior government sources saying the chances of the Prime Minister backing a circuit break in the next 2 weeks are about 80%. Is that right? And if it is, why doesn't he do it now to save lives, fix testing and protect the NHS? Again, a good 6th question. He knows that Johnson won't ever answer these questions. If he smells danger in a question, he won't answer it. And there's danger in every question today. So what he's doing, he's asking a question to have a dig, first of all, but he's asking a question that's really just making a point because he knows the question won't be touched by Johnson. He's saving it up for future. There was no good answer to this question, which is just as well because Johnson has no good answer to any question. And sure enough, Johnson then get up and went on his pre-prepared rant. What he responded with was exactly what he responds to every 6th question with. It wouldn't have mattered. Keir Starmer could have got up and he could have just said, look, it's my 6th question, but, the Prime Minister never answers them. He just has his pre-prepared rant. So here's my question. What's the Prime Minister's favourite colour? It would have been the same thing. Except that question he may have answered because, he may not have smelt the danger in it. Didn't even refer to the quote. The question was about the quotation about senior government sources. He could have stood up and said, I'm not aware of that. And if they're quoting senior government sources, I don't think they've got their sources quite right. That is not my position. Could have said that and sat down. That would have been fine. But no. He wants to grandstand. So he did his usual thing. Then Ian Blackford for the SNP. Now, first of all, there's 2 steps back, I thought, with Ian Blackford. The first one is he was back to his old setup a few months ago. So I'm guessing that where he was his home and where he was last week, which looked much better, was his office. Never mind. Purely cosmetic. Never mind. He quoted Brewdog as saying that the end of the job retention scheme, which ends at the end of this month, will lead to a tsunami of unemployment. Blackford then noted that there are thousands of businesses across the UK who are calling for the government to change their minds on this. There are 2 weeks left, he said. He said the Prime Minister has 2 choices. Keep the furlough scheme fully intact, not knocking it down like they're trying to do, or accept a tsunami of unemployment on our people this winter. What is the Prime Minister going to choose? Now, this is a bit of a nothing question. It is a nothing question. It's an important issue, don't get me wrong, but it is no different to the same question he's asked before and will again. And the answer will be the same. And I have no issue at all with bringing issues back to the table. Absolutely. In fact, you should on an important issue like this. But all it will do is just keep reminding people that the government had a choice in this. So it's not that it's a useless question, but it's not a question that traps Johnson for the future. It doesn't get Johnson to say anything he hasn't already said. And sure enough, when Johnson did get up, he got straight. He got up. It was 5 seconds. He was sat on his arse again. He just trotted out. It wasn't even the same lines as before. It was much shorter. I suppose there was no point in Cummings trying to train him into remembering a different answer. His response was just talking up the benefits of universal credit, which is a system that is notorious for generating extra levels of poverty wherever it is rolled out. You know, so then Blackford got up and said, look, I mean, he could have pre-prepared this because he knows what Johnson's answer would have been. He said, look, that answer does just show that the Prime Minister doesn't get it. He said, universal credit, is that really what the Prime Minister is saying to those who could be saved? People don't want to hear of the boasting and the excuses that we get. They want action. These half measures don't cover it. He said, we're headed towards a Tory winter of mass unemployment caused by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. Then he quoted a bit of a social media meme from the week. It's based on some government ads going out trying to encourage people to retrain. Very callous ads. Even a government minister has had to admit that they're callous. You know, say it's talking about, oh, so-and-so doesn't know that they're about to do this job, or they're about to do this job. They just don't know it yet. Can't remember the exact wording. So then, you know, so Ian Blackford said, you know, we know what Tory backbenchers are saying, that the Prime Minister's next job could be on the backbenchers. He just doesn't know it yet. He said, does he not realise that if he does this, he will never be forgiven for the damage he's about to inflict on people up and down Scotland? Yeah, I'm sure that's probably true. At the same time, I mean, first of all, Conservative governments, you know, take advantage of the fact that people do have very short memories when it comes to it. And also, let's face facts, the Conservatives have lost Scotland already in more ways than one. You know, it's not just that in the next general election in the UK that they're going to lose the few seats that they have. They've probably, by the time we get to that point, it may actually be too late. They may have lost Scotland literally, you know, literally. So I don't think Johnson cares about it, is the bottom line. And it was the same answers. When he got up, it was the same answers. And because he knows Blackford can't come to him, he then put words in Blackford's mouth saying, you know, when he'd finished talking about all the money he's been pumping into the furlough scheme, which is, remember, again, doesn't matter how much money you pump in. What matters is it enough? Is it enough? The answer is no. And then he added that he congratulates the SNP for actually supporting his tiered approach, unlike the party opposite. So you're not trying to play party politics there, Bojo, eh? No? All right then. I mean, being honest, all party leaders should play party politics. I would take a dim view of any political party leader not doing so. It's just as well that Boris Johnson's not very good at it. But there we are. That was PMQs for another week. In fact, for another couple of weeks, because Parliament will be rising. There won't be one next week. Now, they're rising for about a week and a half. So there probably will be one the week after, but not next week. But we'll have to see anyway. I'll have to check. But those are my thoughts on it anyway. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.